I saved $1 million for my kids, but they chose their stepmom on my birthday, so I changed the will. It was my 70th birthday, and my house smelled of cinnamon roast and sweet cranberry pie, but the chairs stayed empty. The morning started early, as it always had. I woke before the sun folded the afghan at the foot of my bed and walked into the kitchen with the same quiet anticipation I'd felt every October for the last decade. Outside, the trees were shedding amber leaves that danced gently across the driveway. Inside, my old radio hummed with soft jazz, and the kettle clicked once before it sighed to life. I went to the farmer's market before breakfast. Mr. Doyle waved from behind a stack of Macintosh apples, his flannel shirt tucked sloppily into jeans like always. He handed me a bunch of rosemary on the house. "For that roast you do," he said. "The one you make when family's comin'." I smiled and nodded. I didn't tell him they hadn't shown up last year either. Back home, I laid out the cloth napkins. The embroidered ones I only used on special days. I polished the silver, even though no one would notice, and wrote out place cards in my best cursive, Ethan, Hannah, Vivian. The pie cooled by the window, its sugary scent drifting across the hallway. I even lit the vanilla candle in the bathroom, something Hannah once teased me about, saying it was so quaint. The dining table looked like a spread from a Thanksgiving magazine. 6 chairs, 3 plates. My wedding, China. I checked the family group chat. No new messages. I sent a photo of the table and typed, "Can't wait to see you all. Dinner's at 6. Love you, you, by 3. The roast was done. I kept the oven on low. By 5, I switched to my blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons I pinned on the brooch Jim gave me on our last anniversary. I stared at the clock more than I should have. 6 came and went. The radio played a song from my 20s, something about missing chances. By 7, I poured myself a glass of tea and sat by the front window. A single car passed a neighbor, not my kids. My phone buzzed once, a work email, nothing else. I stood, knees creaking, and packed the plates into Tupperware. I told myself they'd be hungry later, even if they didn't make it. I went to the hallway drawer and pulled out 2 envelopes, both sealed, each with a check that would make their lives easier than mine ever was. Underneath them lay the deed to the house. I hesitated, then tucked them all back into the folder and slid the drawer shut. Later in the kitchen, the fridge hummed gently as I sat at the head of the table. My plate was empty. I looked at the candle stub in the center and whispered, "Happy birthday, Marion," to no one in particular. The calendar still hung beside the phone. October 14th was circled in red, dinner with Ethan and Hannah. 6 p.m., I didn't erase it. The next morning, Marion receives a photo on Facebook, her kids at a party. Not hers. 2 clicks, one to delete the birthday group chat, the other to email a lawyer. The silence of the house pressed heavier than usual that morning. I stood in the living room, bathed in soft gray light, leaking through the curtains, holding my phone like it might burn me. My thumb hovered for only a moment before tapping delete chat. No more unread promises. Then I opened my email, found the old message from June with Mr. Tomlin's contact, and hit reply. The subject line read, "Appointment request." The drawer that once held deeds and dreams now felt like a tomb. I didn't even open it this time. I just walked past it, brushed the dust off my cardigan, the faded navy one I used to wear at the library, and headed across the street to June's. She poured chamomile into 2 chipped mugs and set down a plate of lemon cookies. Her kitchen still smelled like antiseptic and cinnamon, a remnant of her nurse days, and her stubborn belief in Vicks VapoRub. She looked at me over her bifocals. "You done waiting for crumbs?" she asked, not unkindly. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "I think I might be. You raised them with books, Marion, but they only read their own chapters." That one stuck with me all the way to Mr. Tomlin's office. His office was tucked above the old bakery, up a flight of creaky stairs. A little bell jingled when I opened the door. The space smelled of paper and peppermint. Dusty law, encyclopedias lined the walls. A small U.S. flag drooped in the corner next to a faded poster about elder trusts. He stood up slowly when I entered. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, buttoning his sweater vest. His voice had that patient rhythm, the kind that didn't rush anyone. I nodded, unsure why my throat felt tight. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "I understand you want to update your estate documents." I pulled the yellow envelope from my purse and laid it on the desk. "That's the old one. Read it if you like. Then shred it." He paused, lifting his glasses to his forehead. "Are you certain I am?" He leafed through the pages anyway, respectful of the past I had just buried. Then he folded the papers neatly and placed them in the shredder. It whirred softly, turning promises into confetti. We spent the next hour drafting the new will. Everything, my savings, the house, the tiny book collection I curated over a lifetime, was to go to a local literacy fund and a charity that helped single mothers return to school. I added a note requesting my library cardigan be donated to the children's reading room. Mr. Tomlin looked up from typing and softly asked, "Are you sure?" I looked straight at him and said, steady and calm, "I've never been more sure." That night, I returned home to the same quiet house. I stood in the hallway where the birthday cards were kept, each tucked inside a shoebox, labeled by year I. Opened them all one by one. Most were store-bought, scribbled with love, Ethan, or hope. "It's happy, Mom." Some years there were none. One card caught my eye. It had glitter and stickers in a child's scrawl. "Happy birthday, Grandma, I love you." Big like the moon. "Vivian." I set that one aside. The rest I shredded. "Hai viet no yung chung ba theo prompt nam." ChatGPT deny. They didn't bring flowers, but they brought demands. I heard their footsteps before the knock, quick, sharp, like heels on hardwood. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I saw Hannah's stiff silhouette and Ethan's hunched shoulders. I opened it without a smile. They entered like guests in a stranger's home, eyes scanning for something to criticize. The cake from Vivian had been left in the fridge. Marion placed it on the table, still untouched. I had taken it out this morning, placed it neatly beside the sugar bowl, hoping maybe Vivian might see it and remember the pumpkin decor, hung limp in the windows, the Halloween candy, bowl full and untouched, save for the lone butterscotch I snuck. In a moment of quiet, the wind scraped dry leaves across the porch, and somewhere down the block, a child shrieked with laughter. The season was moving forward. I was too. "Mom," Hannah started before she sat. "We heard from Uncle Mark. You changed the will." Ethan didn't even sit. He hovered near the hutch, arms folded. "Is this about the birthday?" she continued. "You're punishing us for one missed night." I didn't answer right away. I walked to the kitchen, poured 3 cups of coffee, then set 2 down without comment. "Mine," I held on to, cold. "It's not one night," I said, still facing the window. "It's a lifetime," Ethan scoffed. "Come on, that's not fair." "No," I turned, voice steady. What's not fair is the silence every Thanksgiving while I sat at a table set for 5. What's not fair is mailing you birthday cards you never opened or baking pies that spoiled untouched. What's not fair is pretending I wasn't lonely. They said nothing. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator, and somewhere outside, wind rustling plastic skeletons on someone's porch. Vivian tugged gently at her mother's sleeve. "Grandma," she asked, voice full of that innocent ache, "why don't you love us anymore?" That did it. I crouched beside her, brushed her curls back with my wrinkled fingers, and kissed her soft forehead. "I do," I whispered. "But I love me too." And I forgot how, for a long time, silence followed, thick and jagged. "I raised you to be strong," I said, turning to Ethan and Hannah. "But I forgot to teach myself the same." Hannah's voice cracked. "You're cutting us out of everything. You have 30 days to move out of the house." "I still legally own," I said. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. Hannah stood rigid, cheeks flushed. The flicker of entitlement in their eyes met the firmness in mine and lost. The door creaked open as they stepped onto the porch. Behind them, the hallway echoed with memories I no longer wanted to carry. A neighbor kid in a dinosaur costume skipped up the walkway, paused at the porch stairs, then darted away, sensing something grown-up and cold. As they walked to the car, Hannah muttered under her breath, "You'll regret this." I closed the door slowly, my hand resting on the frame just long enough to steady my breath. "I already did," I whispered. "Until now, I bought them a house. Now I'm taking it back, with my name still on every brick." The wind bit sharper than usual that morning. My fingers trembled, not from the chill, but from the jangle of the keys in my coat pocket. Keys to a house I once gave with love, and now I was reclaiming with resolve. I remembered the day I signed the deed, thinking, this is their future. Now it's mine again. The realtor's office smelled like synthetic pumpkin and cinnamon. Wax melts. Not the real kind, like my kitchen used to. Carla, a woman in her 50s with silvering curls and eyes that knew pain, smiled when I handed her the spare key. "You're doing the right thing," she said gently. I nodded. "Just list it," I replied. "Price, it fair, but move fast." She scanned the paperwork. "Your name's still the only one on the title." I exhaled. That's the point. Later that afternoon, the storm came, not from the sky, but from my front steps. Ethan didn't knock. He banged. "You're selling our house," he shouted before I even opened the door. "No," I said softly. "I'm selling mine." "You can't do this," he said again, as if repetition could change the truth. I stepped aside so he could storm in, pacing, like a man who'd never had to read fine print. Michelle followed, arms crossed, fury in her carefully drawn eyebrows. "Where is Vivian supposed to sleep now?" she demanded. I looked her in the eye. "Wherever her parents decide." "That's not for me to fix anymore," she scoffed. "You're punishing her for our mistake." "No," I replied steady. "I'm making sure I never make the same mistake again." The conversation circled like vultures. Accusations, denials, the word selfish, flung more than once. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the side table, pulled out the manila envelope I'd tucked away, and laid it gently on the dining room table. The original deed. My name in bold black ink stood where it had always been. Unremoved, untouched. I slid it toward Ethan. "You forgot," I said. But I didn't. Neither spoke. He stared at it, as if expecting the paper to dissolve. Michelle's breath hitched. I let the silence hang like laundry on a cold day. Eventually, they left. No hugs, no goodbyes, just the echo of the door closing behind them. The next morning, my phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. The scent of lavender still clinging to my late husband's old flannel shirt. Marion, Carla's voice was brisk but kind. The house has 3 offers already. I held the shirt for a moment longer, smoothing the collar before answering. Let's take the best one fast. I turned off my phone, and the silence felt like a warm blanket. It was late November, and the first breath of winter had brushed the windows with fog. I pushed open the double doors of the cafe, the bell above them chiming soft and low, like a whisper, saying, "Welcome back." The place still smelled like cedar shelves and freshly ground coffee, with a hint of orange peel I'd tucked into the simmer pot behind the counter. They once called only when they needed money. Now, even that had stopped, and somehow I didn't miss it. The space had been a dream, long before it had a name. Rows of secondhand books found new homes between baskets of yarn, purring cats, and chipped mugs that warmed the hands of strangers. The fireplace crackled softly in the corner. Miles, young and thoughtful, arranged biscotti beside the register while asking if I wanted him to update the cafe's Instagram. "You go ahead." I smiled, adjusting my reading glasses. "Just make sure my chin isn't in any photos." He laughed and nodded. "Got it. Only the books and the drinks." The seniors arrived before 10. Ellie helped stack book donations into themed piles. Mystery memoir, a whole shelf for war novels the veterans liked. Thursdays brought a knitting circle. Fridays, a group of quiet, reflective men and women in ball caps and faded jackets met for what they called coffee and remembering. Mr. Doyle, now retired from the farmer's market, came in every Tuesday. He always ordered the Silent Strength latte, a name I'd scribbled on the menu board one afternoon after rereading a poem that had once helped me through grief. "You've built something rare here, Marion," he said one morning, his hands warming around the cup. "You gave us a room that listens." The reporter arrived that same week, notebook in hand, eyes shining like he'd stepped into a different century. He asked questions, took photos of Miles, pouring coffee of Ellie, knitting by the window. I didn't mind. I just hoped he'd spell my name right. One quiet evening after the last guest had gone, and Miles had waved goodnight, I sat by the fire with a cup of chamomile. A donated copy of Anne of Green Gables rested on my lap. When I opened it, something fell out. A note, handwritten on a yellowed slip of paper. "Your story matters. Keep going." There was no name. I held it to my chest and closed my eyes. Maybe it was from Ellie or Miles, or maybe from a stranger who'd seen more than I realized. Outside, the streetlights buzzed on. I pulled the curtain gently across the window, letting the jazz playlist fill the air like company. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a pale sunrise and the scent of pumpkin bread rising in the oven. I tied on my apron and opened the door to let in the soft morning air, and froze. Luna stood there, her hair tangled, eyes swollen from crying. Her hands rested gently on the swell of her belly. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. She said, "Mom, I made a mistake." I said, "Then let this be your first step, right?" The rain had been falling since morning, tapping a steady rhythm on the cafe windows like an old clock trying to tell a new time. Thanksgiving had come quiet and gray, but inside the back room, it was warm, pillows on the armchairs, soft cinnamon lingering in the air, and the hum of Miles steeping tea just beyond the door. I remembered the Elsa cake. I remembered the shredded deed. I remembered who I became. Luna sat across from me, her belly now full with life, and her eyes hollowed out by too many nights without sleep. Her mascara had long since run, leaving tired shadows on her cheeks. I handed her a tissue, without a word, just a gentle glance that said, "You may speak, or not. Either way, I'm here." "He left," she whispered, "took the car, the savings, and my last ounce of pride." I didn't flinch. I have nowhere to go. I let silence stretch between us like a soft rope, not to hang her with guilt, but to pull her closer to her own voice. Miles came in quietly, placed 2 cups of steaming peppermint tea on the side table, and slipped out again with a nod. No words, just the kind of respect you can't teach. Luna reached for the tea, but didn't drink it. Her hands trembled. "I know. I said things," she mumbled, "and I let them. I let him." Her voice cracked. I didn't interrupt. I wouldn't rescue her from the truth. "You don't have to forgive me," she added, eyes downcast. "I won't offer you money," I said finally. "But there's a spare room upstairs. It's quiet and it's clean. You can have it for a month." She blinked. "No rent. No rescues either," I said, sipping my tea. "Just a door. You decide if you walk through it." Tears fell, but they weren't dramatic. They were slow, private, the kind that fall when you finally let yourself feel tired. Luna reached into her purse and pulled out a folded hospital pamphlet. They gave me a due date, January 9th. I nodded, tracing the rim of my mug with one finger. "Will you come to the birth?" she asked, voice barely more than breath. "I'll be at the cafe," I said. "You know where to find me." She didn't ask again. She just sat there, letting her body remember that safety doesn't always come with conditions. When she finally stood, I helped her on with her coat too thin for the weather. The bell above the front door jangled faintly as it opened. She hesitated in the doorway, rain falling like threads of silver around her. Then she turned back. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," I smiled. "And to you." She stepped out into the afternoon, the mist catching her hair, making her look younger. For a moment, like the girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during story time. I didn't follow. I returned to the back room, where the cat Pepper, rescued from a bookstore flood last spring, had curled up on the blanket beside my reading chair. I eased into it, book in hand, the tea still warm, the fire still murmuring behind the glass. Outside, the town slowed for its dinners and dramas. Inside, I turned the page. This time, I gave thanks for myself. The rain had stopped, but its memory still lingered in the scent of cinnamon and the hush of an empty cafe. I didn't need applause or apologies. What I needed, I had finally given myself. I used to think that sacrifice was love, that giving everything meant I would be cherished. But I've come to understand, if you don't value yourself, even your closest kin might forget how to. Like a favorite quilt once passed from hand to hand on winter nights, warm, familiar, until it's folded away in the attic, no longer needed, no longer seen. So if this story found you at the edge of your own quiet storm, maybe it's...
Her room stinks of old age. My daughter-in-law whispered over the phone, not knowing I was standing right behind the door. Those words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, please type a 1 in the comments. And please, like this video and subscribe. Let's show that together we are strong. My name is Elena. I am 79 years old. And this is the story of how the people I dedicated my entire life to made me feel like I didn't belong in my son's house or anywhere else in this world. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of Andrew's sprawling home in the suburbs of Chicago, casting long shadows across the marble countertops that always felt cold beneath my fingers. I stood there in my faded blue house dress, the same one I'd worn to feed the chickens on our family farm for 30 years, feeling completely out of place in this modern mansion my son and his wife called home. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched my ceramic coffee mug, the one I'd brought from the farm. It was chipped on the rim, stained from decades of morning routines, but it held the heat better than those thin, expensive cups Jessica preferred. The tremor wasn't new. Parkinson's had been creeping into my life like an unwelcome visitor, making simple tasks feel like mountains to climb. The house around me hummed with the silent efficiency of wealth marble floors that echoed every footstep, walls painted in colors Jessica called sophisticated neutrals, but which reminded me of storm clouds, crystal chandeliers that lit everything with a harsh, clinical brightness. Nothing soft, nothing warm, nothing that whispered, "home," the way our old farmhouse had. With its creaky wood floors and the sun-faded wallpaper George had helped me hang when Andrew was just learning to walk. I had been living here for 8 months, ever since Andrew insisted I move in after George's funeral. "Mom, you can't stay on that farm all by yourself," he'd said, in that tone sons use when they've already made decisions for their parents. "Jessica and I have plenty of space. It'll be easier for everyone." Easier. That word had haunted me for months. The guest room they'd given me was at the far end of the house, next to the laundry room, where the washing machine hummed day and night. Andrew said it was more convenient, since I wouldn't have to climb stairs. But I knew the truth. It was as far away from their lives as they could push me while still claiming to care. The room smelled of fabric softener and industrial cleaner. Nothing like the lavender sachets I'd kept in my dresser drawers for 40 years. My few belongings looked lost in the space. George's reading glasses on the nightstand, our wedding photo in its tarnished silver frame, the quilt my mother had sewn, which now looked shabby against Jessica's designer bedding. Every morning, I tried to be useful. I'd wake before dawn, just as I had for decades on the farm, and tiptoe into the kitchen to make coffee. I'd wipe down countertops that were already spotless. I'd arrange flowers from Jessica's garden that she'd mentioned were going to go to waste anyway. And I'd make small breakfasts that no one seemed to want. The twins, Ben and Lily, my precious grandchildren, would tear through the kitchen like little tornadoes, grabbing protein bars and juice boxes before Jessica hurried them off to their private school in her gleaming SUV. Sometimes, Lily's eyes would meet mine and I'd smile, remembering the little girl who used to beg for my sugar cookies, but she'd quickly look away, as if acknowledging me might get her into trouble. "Good morning, sweethearts," I'd whisper as they passed, but they never seemed to hear me anymore. I had started a small garden in the corner of their backyard, just a few tomato plants and herbs like the ones I'd grown on the farm. It gave my hands something to do, something that felt familiar in this sterile environment. But Jessica had asked me to move it behind the tool shed, where guests couldn't see it from the patio. "It just doesn't fit the aesthetic we're going for," she'd explained with that tight smile she reserved for conversations she found unpleasant. That particular morning, as I stood in the kitchen sipping my coffee and watching the birds at the feeder I'd hung outside my window, I heard voices coming from the living room. Jessica was on one of her phone calls with her sister, the kind that always seemed to involve complaining about something or someone. I moved closer to the doorway, not to eavesdrop, but because the coffee pot was in that direction and I needed a refill. That's when I heard it. "I swear, the whole downstairs smells like old lady." Jessica's voice carried clearly through the open doorway. Her tone was sharp, exasperated, the way she spoke about the gardener when he left grass clippings on the driveway. I don't know if it's her perfume, or her medications, or just, I don't know, old age. I can't stand it anymore. Her room just stinks. The words hit me like a physical blow. I froze in the doorway, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, watching my daughter-in-law pace across the living room that had never felt like a place I belonged. "And she cooks these weird, old-fashioned meals," Jessica continued, her voice gaining momentum. "The whole house smells like, I don't know, nursing home food. I've started buying those expensive air fresheners and placing them strategically, but nothing works. It's like a presence that just hangs over everything." I backed away, my slippers silent against the marble floor, and leaned against the wall in the hallway. My heart was beating so loudly I was afraid they would hear it. Andrew, of course, says nothing, Jessica went on. He just pretends everything is fine, but I see how uncomfortable the kids are. They don't want to bring friends over anymore. Can you blame them? What teenager wants to explain why their grandmother is living in what is basically the service quarters? The coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor, sending shards of ceramic and hot coffee all over the pristine marble. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Jessica's voice stopped abruptly. I knelt carefully, my arthritic knees protesting, and began picking up the broken pieces. This mug had been George's favorite, the one he'd used for his morning coffee for 23 years. I had hand-washed it every single day. I had protected it through 2 moves and countless busy mornings. Now it lay in fragments on a floor that had never wanted it there in the first place. "Everything okay over there?" Jessica called out, her voice artificially cheerful. "Just clumsy," I called back, my own voice steadier than I felt. "I'll clean it up." And one. As I gathered the pieces, each shard felt like a small death, not just for the mug, but for the illusion I had clung to that this arrangement would somehow work, that I would eventually find my place in their carefully orchestrated life. That night, I sat in my room as the sounds of family life filtered through the walls. Andrew helping Ben with his homework, Jessica discussing weekend plans, the television playing some show they all watched together in the living room where I no longer felt welcome. The air freshener Jessica had placed outside my door released its artificial lavender scent every 15 minutes, a constant reminder that my presence needed to be masked, neutralized, made palatable. I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out a small photo album I'd kept hidden beneath my sweaters. Page after page of memories, George and I on our wedding day, Andrew taking his first steps across our farmhouse kitchen, family picnics under the old oak tree, Christmas mornings when the house was filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon rolls. In every picture, I was surrounded by people who loved me, who wanted me there, who saw me as essential rather than inconvenient. At what point had I become someone whose very existence needed to be apologized for? I closed the album and looked at myself in the mirror across the room. 79 years old, gray hair I still styled every morning out of habit, blue eyes that had seen decades of joy and sorrow, hands that had worked hard, loved deeply, built a life alongside a man who had cherished every day we shared. Was I really just a burden now? A problem to be managed until a more permanent solution could be found? The questions hung in the air like smoke, acrid and inescapable, as I prepared for another sleepless night in a house that felt less like a home with each passing day. The incident with the broken mug haunted my dreams that night, but it was nothing compared to the flood of memories that came rushing back as I lay in the dark. Memories of everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had poured into this family that now treated me like an unwelcome stranger. I remembered the day Andrew called me, 3 years ago, his voice tight with panic. "Mom, I need help. The business is going under. Jessica's pregnant with the twins, and we're about to lose the house. I know it's a lot to ask, but—" I didn't even let him finish. The next morning, I was at the bank in our small farming town, sitting across from Mr. Perez, who had handled our accounts for 30 years. George had only been gone for 6 months, and I was still learning how to make decisions on my own, still reaching for his hand during difficult conversations that were no longer there. "Elena, are you sure about this?" Mr. Perez asked. His weathered face creased with concern as he looked over the documents. "This is your life savings, everything you and George worked for. $47,000, every penny we had scraped together from decades of farming, of selling eggs and vegetables at the town market, of George working construction during the winter months when the land rested. Money we had planned to use for our golden years, for the trips we had dreamed of but never taken, because there was always something the farm needed first. Andrew needs it," I said simply, signing the papers with the same pen George had used to sign our mortgage 35 years earlier. Family comes first. The money had saved Andrew's consulting business. It allowed him to keep the house where Jessica was building her perfect life. Within 2 years, his company had rebounded and was thriving. He sent me a thank you card with a generic message and a photo of the newborn twins. No mention of paying it back. No acknowledgement that I was now living on Social Security alone, while he drove luxury cars and took vacations to places I had only seen in magazines. But that wasn't the first time, was it? I rolled over, pulling the thin comforter closer as more memories bubbled up like gas in dark water. There was Andrew's college tuition. George and I had mortgaged our farm twice to pay for his education at the University of Illinois, the same university Jessica had attended, where he met her at some frat party. 4 years of tuition, room and board, and spending money so he could focus on his studies, instead of working part-time like most of his classmates. We had eaten beans and rice for months while his check for a spring break trip to Cancun cleared. George had worn the same winter coat for 10 years, patching the holes with duct tape rather than buying a new one. Because Andrew needed money for textbooks and a laptop. It's an investment in his future, George would say when I worried about our dwindling savings. He'll take care of us when we're old. When Andrew graduated with honors, he hugged us at the ceremony and promised he would never forget what we had sacrificed for him. The next week, he moved to Chicago and got a job at a consulting firm. His calls became monthly, then just holidays, then just Christmas and my birthday if I was lucky. I had driven myself to George's doctor's appointments because Andrew was busy at work and couldn't get away. I had sat in waiting rooms alone, holding George's hand as nurses explained treatment options and side effects, making decisions about the man I had loved for 53 years while our son attended client dinners and company retreats. The night George died, I called Andrew at 2:47 in the morning. His phone went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Finally, Jessica answered on the 4th call, her voice annoyed and sleepy. "Elena? It's the middle of the night. What is it?" "George is gone," I whispered, my voice breaking. "He passed an hour ago. Could you please put Andrew on the phone?" "He's sleeping. Can it wait until morning?" I stared at the phone, at the love of my life lying still in our bed, at the 47 desiccated years of marriage and photos and shared dreams that now felt like echoes in an empty house. "No," I said quietly. "It can't wait. Andrew arrived 2 days later, staying just long enough for the funeral and to discuss the next steps for my living situation. He stood in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I had made him breakfast every day before school for 18 years, and told me the farm was too much responsibility for someone my age. "Mom, you can't keep this place up on your own," he said, not looking at me as he surveyed the house as if appraising it for sale. "The roof needs repair. The plumbing is old. What if you fell, and no one found you for days?" With the expression someone might use while browsing a thrift store. "We have plenty of space," he added, his voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "And it would be so nice for the kids to spend more time with their grandmother, except the kids barely acknowledged my existence. Ben, now 14, was too busy with his elite private school and his soccer team to notice me. Lily, 12, spent her time in dance classes and coding camps that cost more than George and I spent on groceries in a month. I had given up my independence, my home, my garden, my neighbors who had known me for 40 years, my church where I had sung in the choir since I was 16. I had given up my identity as Elena, a farmer's wife, a pillar of the community, a woman who knew her own worth. In exchange, I had become a guest who had overstayed her welcome. But even here, even feeling like an intruder in my own son's house, I had kept giving. When Lily mentioned she wanted piano lessons, I used my grocery money to pay for her first month of classes. When Ben needed new soccer cleats, I took money from the small emergency fund I kept tucked away in my underwear drawer. When Jessica complained about the cost of the twins' summer camp, I quietly covered the difference, telling myself it was what grandmothers were supposed to do. Last month, when Jessica's book club met at the house, she asked if I would perhaps stay in my room so the ladies could have their space. I spent 3 hours listening to their laughter echo through the walls, smelling the expensive wine and catered appetizers I was not invited to share, wondering when I had become someone who needed to be hidden away, like a family secret. The worst of it wasn't the money I had given. It wasn't even the loneliness or the feeling of being unwanted. It was the slow, dawning realization that I had trained them to treat me this way. Every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I had smiled when my heart was breaking, every time I had made myself smaller to accommodate their comfort, I had taught them that my feelings didn't matter, that my needs were secondary, that my love came without conditions or expectations of reciprocity. George used to tell me I was too generous, too trusting. "Elena, honey," he'd say when I lent money to neighbors who never paid it back or volunteered for every church committee that needed help. "You can't save everyone. Sometimes people have to save themselves." But I believed family was different. I believed the love I poured out would eventually come back to me, that the sacrifices I made would be remembered with gratitude, that growing old in the bosom of family meant being cherished instead of tolerated. As the dawn light began to filter through the curtains of my basement room, I heard the familiar sounds of the household waking up above me. Footsteps on the marble floors, the coffee maker grinding beans, Jessica's voice calling out orders to the children to hurry with their breakfast. Familiar family sounds that I was no longer a part of. I reached for my Bible on the nightstand, the same King James version George had given me on our first Christmas as newlyweds. Its pages were soft with age, marked with decades of underlined verses and notes in the margins written in my careful script. I turned to a passage I had highlighted years ago, during another difficult time, when I had wondered if my giving heart was a blessing or a curse. "Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." For 79 years, I had mastered the innocent dove part. Perhaps it was time to learn about snakes. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Elena?" Jessica's voice had that artificially sweet tone she used when she needed something. "Could I have a word with you for a moment?" I put down my Bible and opened the door to find her standing there in her yoga clothes, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her smile as polished as the marble floors she walked on. "I hope I didn't wake you," she said, though we both knew the house had been awake for 30 minutes. "I wanted to talk to you about Lily's piano competition. The entry fee is quite expensive, and with all our other expenses—" She trailed off, letting the request hang in the air between us, like incense in an empty church. I looked at her expectant face, at the designer workout clothes that cost more than my monthly Social Security check, at the diamond stud earrings catching the light from the hallway chandelier. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words automatic as breath. "How much do you need?" But even as I agreed, even as I saw the relief flood her features, a small voice in my head whispered a question that would change everything. Was I being used? The question haunted me for days. Was I being used? It followed me through my morning routines. It whispered to me during the long afternoons when the house fell silent, and it kept me awake at night staring at the ceiling as the washing machine hummed its endless cycle next door. I started to notice things I had trained myself to overlook: the way Jessica suddenly remembered my helpful nature whenever bills were due, the way Andrew called me Mom, with that particular warmth in his voice, only when he needed something, the way the twins acknowledged my existence primarily when they wanted me to drive them places Jessica was too busy to handle. The morning after Jessica asked for the money for Lily's piano competition, I watched my granddaughter eat breakfast at the kitchen island. She was hunched over her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, completely absorbed in the digital drama that occupies 12-year-old girls these days. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, placing a plate of fresh blueberry muffins on the counter. I'd been up since 5 in the morning baking them, using the last of my special vanilla extract I'd been saving. Lily glanced up for barely a second. "Thanks," she mumbled. Then she went back to her phone. I stood there, a dish towel in my hand, waiting for more. Waiting for her to notice that I had remembered blueberries were her favorite. Waiting for her to ask about my day, or tell me about hers, or acknowledge that I was more than a food dispensing machine in her peripheral vision. But she didn't. She grabbed a muffin without looking, took 2 bites, then wrapped the rest in a napkin and shoved it into her backpack. "I'm going to be late," she announced to no one in particular, sliding off the stool. I watched her walk away. This child I had held as a newborn, whose first steps I had witnessed, whose every milestone I had celebrated with more enthusiasm than her own parents. When had I become invisible to her? That afternoon, while I was cleaning my room, I found something that turned my blood to ice. I had been dusting the small desk by my window when I noticed papers scattered underneath. They must have fallen from the stack Andrew kept on top. Documents he had been reviewing for what he called financial planning purposes. As I bent to retrieve them, my eyes caught familiar words on the letterhead. "Last Will and Testament of Elena Maria." My hands trembled as I picked up the papers. This was my will, the one I had updated after George's death. But why did Andrew have a copy in my room? I had given him one for safekeeping, but this one looked different. There were notes scrawled in the margins, calculations written in Andrew's unmistakable handwriting. I held my breath as I read his notations. Proceeds from farm sale, $340,000. Life insurance, $50,000. Remaining savings, approx. $8,000. Total estate value, $398,000. At the bottom of the page, in red ink, was Jessica's handwriting. Minus what we've already loaned. Still substantial inheritance. Loaned. They considered the money I had freely given them a loan. Money they never mentioned paying back, never acknowledged as a sacrifice, never thanked me for beyond those empty greeting cards. But there was more. Stapled to the back was a printout of nursing home costs in the Chicago area, with several facilities circled and notes about Medicare coverage and asset spend-down requirements. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were planning for it, calculating exactly how much my life was worth to them, and researching the cheapest way to store me until that inheritance became available. I sank onto the small chair by my window, the papers scattered across my lap, feeling like I might be sick. The room spun around me as the full magnitude of their betrayal crashed down like a collapsed roof. Every kindness I had interpreted as love had been an investment in their future windfall. Every time Andrew had called me Mom with affection, he had been calculating the compound interest on my mortality. Every time Jessica had smiled and asked about my day, she had been mentally spending my inheritance. That night, I sat at the dinner table like a ghost at my own wake. Andrew carved the roast beef Jessica had prepared, discussing his day at work while she nodded attentively. The twins ate in their usual silence, still glued to their phones despite the no devices at dinner rule that apparently only applied when it was convenient. "Mom, you're quiet tonight," Andrew observed, spooning gravy onto his plate. "Everything okay?" I looked at him across the table. This man I had carried in my womb for 9 months, nursed through childhood illnesses, cheered for at every baseball game and school play. His face was pleasant, even concerned, but now I could see the calculator behind his eyes. Now that I knew what to look for. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "Just tired. You should get more rest," Jessica added with that bright, artificial concern. "At your age, you need to take better care of yourself. At my age, as if being 79 was a character flaw I needed to manage better. As if my aging body was an inconvenience they had to endure until nature solved their problem for them." After dinner, as they settled into their nightly routine of television and homework supervision, I retreated to my room and made a decision that should have been obvious months ago. I was going to leave. Not with a dramatic storm of accusations and tears. Not with explanations or confrontations or attempts to make them understand how deeply they had wounded me. I was simply going to gather what was left of my dignity and walk away from people who saw me as nothing more than a financial portfolio with a pulse. That night, I began to make plans with the methodical precision George had taught me. First, I needed to secure my important documents. My Social Security card, Medicare information, birth certificate, and George's life insurance papers. Andrew had insisted on keeping them safe in his filing cabinet, but I knew where he hid the key. Second, I needed to contact my bank and ensure Andrew had no access to my remaining accounts. The realization that he might have been monitoring my finances sent fresh waves of betrayal through my chest. Third, I needed a place to go. The farm was gone, sold to a young family who had promised to restore its gardens and raise their children in its sun-filled rooms. But there were other options. Senior living communities that valued independence, rather than just providing storage for inconvenient elderly relatives. The next morning, as the family rushed through their usual breakfast chaos, I made my move. Jessica was arguing with Ben about his soccer uniform. Andrew was yelling orders from upstairs about traffic delays. Lily was having a meltdown over a test she'd forgotten to study for. I slipped into Andrew's office and retrieved my documents from his filing cabinet. The key was exactly where he always kept it, taped under the desk drawer, because he had never been particularly creative about hiding things. As I gathered my papers, I found more evidence of their planning. A folder labeled Elena Future Care Options contained brochures for state-subsidized nursing homes, applications for Medicaid assistance, and a timeline suggesting they had been anticipating my transition to professional care within the next 6 months. One brochure was circled in red, Sunshine Home, basic care starting at $1,200 a month. The highlighted text read, family members are encouraged to visit during designated hours. Personal belongings should be limited to what can fit in the provided storage space. They had already picked out my cage. I photographed everything with the smartphone Lily had taught me to use last Christmas, back when she still seemed to enjoy my company. Then, carefully, I returned the documents to their original positions and locked the filing cabinet. Walking back to my room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had clouded my thinking was lifting, replaced by a cold, bright understanding of exactly where I stood in my family's priorities. I was an asset to be managed, not a person to be loved. That afternoon, while the house was empty, I called the number on a business card I had kept in my wallet for years. Grace Morrison, the nursing assistant who had helped care for George during his final months, had been so kind, so genuine in her compassion, that I had saved her card, thinking that perhaps one day I would need someone who actually cared about my well-being instead of my will. Mrs. Del Val. Grace's voice was warm with delightful surprise. How wonderful to hear from you. How are you? For the first time in months, someone had asked that question and actually wanted to hear the answer. I've been better, I admitted, surprising myself with my honesty. Grace, I need some help. Not medical help, but I need to make some changes to my living situation, and I don't know where to start. Of course, she said without hesitation. I have tomorrow afternoon free. Would you like me to come see you so we can talk? Actually, I said, looking around the sterile guest room that had never felt like home. Could we meet somewhere else? Maybe at that little downtown coffee shop that serves real coffee? Grace laughed, a sound like silver bells. Perfect. I'll bring some information on a few excellent senior communities I know, places where people actually want to live, not just exist. After hanging up the phone, I sat in my chair by the window and watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside. The bright red flash of its feathers against the gray October sky felt like a sign, a reminder that even in the darkest seasons, there could still be moments of surprising beauty. For the first time since George's death, I felt something that had been absent so long I had forgotten its name: hope. That night, as I listened to the familiar sounds of family life happening without me in the rooms above, I made a list of everything I wanted to take with me when I left. It wasn't much. George's clothes still hanging in my closet, providing comfort on the hardest nights. Our wedding photo. My Bible. The quilt my mother had sewn. Everything else, the accumulation of a lifetime that had once seemed so important, suddenly felt like anchors weighing me down. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of untethering myself from people who had mistaken my love for their entitlement. Tomorrow, I would begin learning how to be Elena again, instead of just Andrew's inconvenient mother. Tonight, for the first time in months, I fell asleep without crying. My meeting with Grace at Murphy's Cafe downtown was like stepping into sunlight after months in a basement. She arrived 10 minutes early, her warm smile and genuine hug reminding me what it felt like to be welcomed, rather than tolerated. Elena, you look tired, she said as we settled into a corner booth, her brown eyes filled with the kind of concern that expected no compensation. Are you sleeping well? Over coffee and apple pie that actually tasted like my grandmother's recipe? I told her everything, about the broken mug and Jessica's cruel words, about finding the will with their calculations, about the nursing home brochures and the cold realization that I had become nothing more than a financial investment they were waiting to cash in on. Grace listened without judgment, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze my hand when my voice broke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee with a thoughtful precision. Elena, she said finally, you know this isn't normal, right? The way they're treating you is not how families are supposed to work. I nodded, feeling the tears sting my eyes. I keep thinking that if I just try harder, if I'm just more helpful, less of a problem. Stop. Grace's voice was soft but firm. You've already given them everything. Your money, your home, your independence, your dignity. How much more do they want? Your soul? She opened a folder filled with brochures. I want you to see that you have options, not just options to be stored somewhere, but options to live somewhere, not by default, where you would have your own space, your own autonomy, your own life. Where being 79 is considered 79 years of wisdom, not 79 years of burden. The communities she showed me looked nothing like the sterile nursing home Andrew and Jessica had selected. They were active senior living complexes with libraries and gardens, art studios and walking trails, places where residents had book clubs and cooking classes, where they traveled together and volunteered in their communities. Spring Gardens has a waiting list, Grace explained, pointing to a picture of a lovely apartment with large windows and a small kitchenette. But they sometimes have emergency openings for people in difficult situations. I could make a call. That afternoon, while Andrew was at work and Jessica was at her yoga class, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First, I called my bank and had Andrew removed from all my accounts. The customer service representative was patient as I explained that circumstances had changed and I needed full control over my finances. Mrs. Del Valle, she said carefully, I see that your son has been making regular transfers from your savings to his checking account. Were you aware of these transactions? My blood ran cold. What kind of transfers? Let me see. Monthly withdrawals of $800 for the past 6 months. They're marked as household contribution, so I just assumed you had authorized them. $800 a month. Nearly $10,000 in total, money I had never agreed to give, never been asked for. Never known was missing because I had trusted Andrew to manage the statements for the account I could no longer read clearly due to my failing eyesight. I want those transfers stopped immediately, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I want printed statements for the past year sent to a different address. My second call was to Spring Gardens. The director, a Mrs. Martinez, had a voice like honey over steel, warm but authoritative. When I explained my situation in general terms, she offered to meet with me that very evening. Senora Del Valle, we've had several residents join us after family difficulties, she said diplomatically. Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones who understand us least. Would 6 o'clock work for you? My third call was to a taxi company. I was done asking for rides. I was done depending on people who saw every favor as a debt I owed them. When Andrew got home that night, I was waiting in the living room, not hidden away in my basement quarters, not making myself invisible, sitting in his pristine white armchair, as if I had every right to take up space in what was technically still my son's house. Mom, he seemed genuinely pleased to see me, that practiced warmth flooding his voice. How was your day? Jessica mentioned you went out this afternoon. Yes, I said simply. I had some errands to run. Errands? Jessica appeared from the kitchen. Her yoga clothes changed into the kind of casual but expensive outfit she wore when she wanted to look effortlessly put together. What kind of errands? You should have just asked me to drive you. I took a taxi. The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew and Jessica exchanged a look. I now recognized the same expression they had used when discussing my future care options in whispered conversations they thought I couldn't hear. Mom, Andrew said slowly, sitting down across from me. Taking taxis can be expensive. And at your age? Going out by yourself? What if something happened to you? What if you got confused or lost? I'm 79. Not senile, I replied, surprised at the steel in my own voice. Jessica perched on the arm of Andrew's chair, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture of united concern. Elena, we're just worried about you. You haven't seemed like yourself lately. Maybe we should schedule you an appointment with Dr. Martinez just to make sure everything is okay. There it was. The subtle suggestion that my growing independence was actually evidence of declining mental capacity. If I started asserting my rights, started making my own decisions, clearly something was wrong with my brain that needed medical intervention. I'm fine, I said. In fact, I'm better than I've been in months. You seem different, Andrew pressed. Distant. Are you upset about something? Because if we've done something wrong? The performance was masterful. The concerned son, the caring daughter-in-law, both so worried about my well-being. If I hadn't found those nursing home brochures, if I hadn't seen my will covered in their financial calculations, I might have believed them. I've been thinking about my living situation, I said carefully. They both went very still. What about it? Jessica asked, her voice a shade higher than usual. This arrangement isn't working for me anymore. I think it might be time for me to find my own place. Andrew's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, concern, then something that looked suspiciously like panic. Mom, you can't be serious. You can't live on your own. What about your medications? Your doctor's appointments? What if you fall? I managed those things for 79 years before I moved in here. But that was different, Jessica interjected. You're older now, more frail, and just the expense of it. Mom, senior living facilities cost thousands of dollars a month. You can't afford that on Social Security. I almost laughed at the irony. They had been calculating my net worth down to the last penny, but now, suddenly, I was too poor to afford basic housing. I've been looking into some options, I said. I think I can manage. Options? Andrew's voice cracked slightly. What kind of options? Mom, you can't just make major life decisions without talking to us first. We're your family. We need to be involved in these decisions. The same way you were involved when you chose the Sunshine Home? Dead silence. Jessica's face drained of color. Andrew's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you're talking about, Jessica said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. The brochures in Andrew's office, the one with the basic care package circled in red. Were you going to ask for my input on that choice? Or was I just supposed to be grateful for the warehouse you selected? Andrew stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. Mom, were you going through my private papers? My will was mixed in with your private papers, along with calculations about my estate value and notes about the money you've loaned me. Oh, now, we were just trying to plan ahead, to make sure you're taken care of if something happens. By robbing me of $800 a month from my bank account? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Jessica's face went from pale to flushed. Andrew sank back into his chair like a deflating balloon. We weren't robbing you, he said weakly. We were using that money for your care, your food, your utilities, your share of the household expenses. Dad, my share of the household expenses for living in the basement next to your laundry room? $800 a month for the privilege of being hidden from your guests and told my existence stinks? That's not fair, Jessica snapped, her composure finally breaking. We opened our home to you. We fed you, housed you, included you in our family. Do you have any idea what a strain this has put on our marriage? How hard it's been to explain to our friends why we have a grandmother living with us? Do you know what people say about families who can't afford professional care for their elderly parents? The mask was off now. No more pretense of loving concern. No more performances of dutiful children caring for an aging parent. This was about their image, their convenience, their financial planning. So this has all been a burden, I said quietly. That's not what she meant, Andrew began, but Jessica cut him off. Yes, Elena, it has been a burden, a huge one. But we've done it anyway, because we are good people who believe in family responsibility. And now you want to throw it back in our faces? By running off on your own like some rebellious teenager? I stood up slowly, my arthritis making the movement deliberate and careful. They both watched me as if I might either collapse or explode. You're right, I said. This has been unfair to all of us. You shouldn't have to bear the burden of caring for someone you see as a burden, and I shouldn't have to live in a place where I am not wanted. Mom, wait. Andrew reached out to grab my arm, but I pulled back. I'll be moving out within the week. You can have your basement back for storage, the way it was always meant to be. That night, they knocked on my door every hour. First Andrew alone, then Jessica alone, then both of them together, each time with a different approach, pleading, reasoning, guilting, even crying. But my decision was made. Grace had called with good news. Spring Gardens had an emergency opening. A one-bedroom apartment with a view of the garden, available immediately for someone in transitional circumstances. The next morning, while they were at work and school, I packed my few belongings into the suitcases I had brought 8 months earlier. Grace arrived with a friend who owned a moving truck, and together, we transported the remnants of my old life to the beginning of my new one. I left a note on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker I had used every morning to brew coffee no one ever shared with me. Thank you for teaching me the difference between being family and being home. I have found a place where I can be both. Elena. As we drove away from the house that had never welcomed me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since George died. Freedom. The feeling was so foreign, so unexpected, that I began to cry in the passenger seat of Grace's car. But for the first time in months, they were tears of relief instead of despair. My first morning at Spring Gardens, I woke up without the sound of a washing machine rumbling through the walls. The silence was so profound, so peaceful, that for a moment I forgot where I was. Then the sunlight streamed through the east-facing windows instead of the north-facing ones, and I remembered. I was free. The apartment was small, but perfect. A living room with a fireplace I could actually use. A kitchen with a window over the sink that looked out onto a garden where residents grew tomatoes and herbs. And a bedroom that didn't smell like industrial detergent. It was all mine to arrange. Mine to enjoy. Mine to inhabit without permission or apology. I made coffee in my own coffee pot, using the good porcelain cups I had rescued from storage. No more chipped mugs or rushed mornings trying to stay invisible. I sat at my small dining table and watched an elderly man tending the flower beds outside, humming as he worked. When he noticed me in the window, he smiled and waved. A real smile, not the practiced politeness I had grown accustomed to. The first week passed in a dream. I attended the welcome orientation for new residents, where Mrs. Martinez introduced me to a community of people who had chosen to be there, not stored by their families, not hidden away until death claimed them, but actively living in a place designed for their comfort and dignity. "We have book club on Tuesdays," said Margarita Chen, a tiny 83-year-old woman who had been a librarian for 40 years. "And don't let the name fool you. We argue more than we read." Last month, Dorothea threw her copy of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo at Harold because he said romance novels weren't real literature. Harold, a distinguished gentleman with a white beard and twinkling eyes, laughed from across the common room. I stand by that statement, but I do apologize for the bruise. I laughed too. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. When was the last time I had been part of a conversation where people valued my opinion, where my presence added to the group instead of subtracted from it? "Elena, you have that look," Grace said when she came by on Thursday night with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. "What look?" "The look of someone who is remembering who she used to be." She was right. Every day without walking on eggshells, without measuring my words for fear of causing an inconvenience, without hiding parts of myself to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be, I was feeling more like Elena and less like Andrew's bothersome mother. I joined the gardening committee and found myself planning an herb garden that would remind me of the farm. I signed up for the weekly trips to the farmer's market, where I could pick out my own vegetables without checking if they met Jessica's aesthetic standards. I even attended a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but had never allowed myself the time or space to explore. But my newfound peace was shattered on Saturday morning when my phone rang at 7 in the morning. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Andrew's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Good morning to you too, Andrew. Don't you good morning me. You disappeared. You left a note like you were a teenage runaway instead of talking to us like adults." I settled into my comfortable armchair, the one I had positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. "I did try to talk to you. You responded by questioning my mental competence and suggesting I needed a medical evaluation. Because we're worried about you. Mom, you're making impulsive decisions, moving into some random facility without letting us inspect it first, without considering the financial implications." "The financial implications for whom?" Silence. "Andrew, I am quite comfortable here. I have my own space, my independence, and people who actually enjoy my company. Why is that problematic for you?" "It's not problematic. It's just..." "Mom, how much is this place costing you? Because if you're spending your savings on some luxury senior living, there won't be anything left for emergencies. Or for the future. There it was. The real concern wasn't my happiness or well-being, it was the potential depletion of their inheritance. I am managing my finances just fine. Thank you. Are you? Because I checked our joint account, and you've made some very worrying changes. You removed my access, which makes it impossible for me to help you pay bills or handle emergencies. I also discovered you had been helping yourself to $800 a month without my knowledge. That would be worrying to most people. That money was for your care, your room and board, your share of utilities, groceries. $800 for a basement room and the leftovers you didn't want? Andrew, my entire monthly budget here, including meals, activities, and a beautiful apartment, is less than what you were stealing from me. We weren't stealing. Yes, you were. Taking money from someone's account without their knowledge or permission is stealing, regardless of your relationship to the victim. The line was quiet for so long, I thought he had hung up. When he spoke again, his voice had changed less aggressive, more wheedling. Mom, I know we haven't been perfect. Maybe Jessica and I got a little stressed trying to balance everything. But running away is not the answer. Come home and we'll figure things out. We'll do better. This is my home now. That's not your home. Your home is with your family, your son, and your grandchildren who love you. Do they? Because when I lived there, Lily barely acknowledged my existence. Ben treated me like a piece of furniture. You hid me from your social engagements. And Jessica complained about my smell to her friends. You were listening to private conversations. In my own home, yes. Or what I thought was my home. Turns out I was just a temporary tenant paying rent I didn't know I owed. Another long pause. When Andrew spoke again, I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, sharp and insistent. Mom, the kids miss you. They've been asking when you're coming home. It was a lie, and we both knew it. But the fact that he was willing to use the children as emotional weapons told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they had become. If the children want to see me, they are welcome to visit. I am not hiding from them. I am simply not available to be taken for granted. Visit? Mom, you're 20 minutes away. It's not like we can just pop over. No, I suppose that would require making an actual effort to spend time with me instead of just coexisting in the same building. That afternoon, Jessica called. Her approach was different. Tears, guilt, and emotional manipulation wrapped in motherly concern. Elena, I am so sorry, she sobbed over the phone. I know I haven't been the daughter-in-law you deserved. I know I said terrible things, and I've been selfish and thoughtless. But please, please, come home. The children are devastated. Ben keeps asking where Grandma went, and Lily is crying herself to sleep because she thinks she did something wrong. If this had been true, it might have worked. The Elena of 3 months ago would have packed her bags immediately, overcome with guilt at the thought of causing her grandchildren pain. But I had spent enough time at Spring Gardens to meet other grandparents who maintained healthy, loving relationships with their grandchildren without sacrificing their own well-being. Jessica, if the children want to have a relationship with me, I am absolutely open to that. But it will be a relationship based on mutual respect, not one where I am expected to buy their affection with money and servitude. That's not. We never expected you to buy anything. Didn't you? Then why did every conversation about spending time with the children involve requests for money, piano lessons, soccer equipment, camp fees, competition registrations? When was the last time anyone in your family spent time with me just because they enjoyed my company? The question hung in the air like incense in an empty church. We do enjoy your company, Jessica said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Jessica, I hope that one day that will be true. But right now, I need to focus on rebuilding a life where my worth isn't measured by my utility to other people. On Monday, a surprise visitor arrived. I was watering the herb seedlings I had planted in small pots on my patio when there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Lily standing in the hallway, fidgeting with the straps of her backpack. I opened the door slowly, unsure what to expect. "Hi, Grandma," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Mom dropped me off. She said you live here now." "I do. Would you like to come in?" She nodded and stepped inside. looking around with the wide-eyed curiosity of someone exploring a foreign country. She took in my small living room, my kitchen with its cheerful yellow curtains, my photographs arranged on the mantelpiece. "It's nice," she said finally. "It smells like cookies and flowers." I almost smiled. "Would you like some cookies? I baked snickerdoodles yesterday. Those are my favorite." I remember. We sat at my small dining table, the afternoon light streaming through the windows that belonged to me. Lily ate 3 cookies and drank a glass of milk as I watched this child I had almost given up hope of connecting with. "Grandma," she said suddenly, "are you mad at us?" The question was so direct, so unexpectedly honest, that it took my breath away. "I'm not mad, sweetheart. I'm sad, but I'm also hopeful." "Why are you sad?" "Because I felt invisible when I lived at your house, like no one really saw me or cared about what I thought or felt." She considered this with the seriousness children bring to important matters. "I saw you," she said quietly. Mom said not to bother you because you were always tired and needed to rest." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Jessica had not only been hiding me from her social circle, she had been actively preventing the children from building relationships with me, framing my presence as a burden they needed to tiptoe around. "Lily, I was never too tired to spend time with you. I would have loved to hear about your day, or help you with your homework, or just sit and talk." Her eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really?" We spent the next hour talking about school, and her friends, and her art projects, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She was bright and funny and kind, everything I had hoped she would become but had been prevented from witnessing. When Jessica's car pulled up outside, Lily hugged me tightly. "Can I come back next week?" she whispered. "Anytime you want, sweetheart. But only if you want to, not because someone tells you that you should or shouldn't." She nodded solemnly and picked up her backpack. As I watched her walk to the car, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed. The hope of a genuine relationship with my granddaughter, built on mutual affection instead of obligation or guilt. That night, as I stood in my garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time since George's death, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The phone rang again around 8. Andrew's number flashed on the screen, but I didn't answer. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine. I opened a book I had borrowed from Margarita's lending library and settled into my comfortable chair by the window. For the first time in months, I had nowhere to be, no one to please, and nothing to prove. I was finally home. 3 weeks into my new life, they arrived unannounced. I was in the community garden, kneeling by my herb patch with dirt under my fingernails for the first time since George died. When I heard familiar voices arguing in the parking lot, through the hedge bordering the garden, I could see Andrew's luxury sedan, engine still running, exhaust puffing into the crisp October air. "This is ridiculous, Jessica," Andrew was saying, that edge of barely controlled frustration I remembered from his teenage years. "We should have made an appointment. Just showing up like this makes us look desperate." "We are desperate." Jessica's reply was sharp enough to cut glass. "She's been here for almost a month, Andrew." "A month? Do you realize how much money she's spending? How much she's potentially giving away to strangers who don't even know her?" I stayed crouched behind the tomato plants, my hands still in the dirt, listening to them discuss my life as if I were a wayward stock investment instead of a human being. "Mom always said I could count on my inheritance to help with the kids' college funds," Andrew continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "Now she's living in some commune, probably being brainwashed by people who want to get their hands on her money." "It's not a commune," Jessica snapped. "I looked it up online. It's one of those expensive senior communities where lonely old people go to feel important. They probably have financial advisors roaming the halls, convincing residents to leave money to the facility instead of their families." My hands stilled in the soil. Even their imagined version of my life centered on their financial concerns rather than my well-being. "We need to be smart about this," Jessica went on. "The emotional appeals haven't worked. Maybe it's time to consider other options." "What kind of other options?" "Legal ones. She's showing signs of diminished capacity, making impulsive financial decisions, isolating herself from family. Any judge would see that she needs a conservatorship for her own protection. The words hit me like ice water. A conservatorship would give them total control over my finances, my living situation, my medical care, my entire life. I would be made a legal child again, unable to make decisions about where I lived or how I spent the money George and I had earned through decades of honest work. I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees, and walked toward the parking lot with the measured stride of someone who had finally learned her own worth. "Hello, Andrew. Jessica." My voice was calm, steady, giving no hint of the conversation I had just overheard. They spun around in unison, their faces shifting from surprise to guilt and then to carefully manufactured concern. "Mom," Andrew rushed forward, arms outstretched, as if our relationship were still based on physical affection instead of financial calculation. "You look different." I did look different. 3 weeks of sleeping through the night, eating meals I had chosen for myself, and engaging in conversations where my opinions mattered had restored something to my face that I had lost during those months in their basement. "What brings you here?" "We wanted to see where you're living," Jessica said, her eyes scanning the well-maintained buildings and landscaped grounds with the expression of someone calculating property values. "Make sure you're safe." "I am very safe. Would you like a tour?" They exchanged a look I now recognized as silent communication about their shared agenda. "That would be wonderful," Andrew said. "We've been worried about whether this place is appropriate for someone your age with your needs." My needs. As if I required special accommodation instead of just the same respect and autonomy afforded to any adult human being. I led them through the community center, where Margarita was leading her afternoon book discussion in voices loud enough to be heard 3 counties away. Harold was at the piano, playing jazz standards, while Dorothea sang a duet in a voice that had probably been beautiful 50 years ago and was still enthusiastic today. The art studio hummed with quiet creativity as residents worked on paintings, pottery, and crafts that would never be dismissed as old lady hobbies. "It's very active," Jessica observed, watching an 80-year-old man demonstrate proper Puth technique to a group of women who were clearly humoring him. "Don't you find all this stimulation exhausting?" "I find it energizing. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm living instead of just existing." Andrew surveyed everything with the critical eye of someone conducting an inspection. He asked pointed questions about security, medical facilities, emergency protocols, all reasonable concerns that might have touched me if I hadn't just heard him discussing conservatorship proceedings 10 minutes earlier. When we reached my apartment, they entered with the wary air of people stepping into potentially hostile territory. "It's smaller than I expected," Jessica said, surveying my living room with its comfortable furniture and personal touches. "It's perfect for me. I don't need much space, just enough space to be myself." "But Mom," Andrew sat in my armchair without an invitation. "Don't you miss having family around? Don't you get lonely here with all these strangers?" "These strangers have become friends faster than I ever thought possible. And I see Lily every week now. She visits because she wants to, not because someone tells her she has to." "About that," Jessica's voice took on a tone I had learned to recognize as the prelude to ultimatums. "We've been thinking that perhaps those visits should be more structured, more supervised. You know, to make sure Lily isn't being burdened with having to entertain you." The mask was slipping again. They couldn't control me anymore, so they were going to control my access to my granddaughter. "Lily doesn't entertain me, Jessica. We spend time together. We bake cookies. We work on her art projects. We talk about books. You know, the things grandmothers and granddaughters have been doing for centuries." "Yes, but at her age, she needs to be focused on her future college prep, extracurricular activities. Time spent visiting elderly relatives, while sweet, isn't really productive for her development." Elderly relatives. Not her grandmother, not family. Elderly relatives who were impediments to Lily's productivity. "I see." I moved to the kitchen and began making tea, my hands steady despite the rage building in my chest. "And what about Ben? Does he also need protection from his unproductive elderly relative?" "Ben's just going through a phase," Andrew explained, accepting the cup I offered him. "Teenage boys don't really want to hang out with their grandmothers. It's nothing personal. Everything about this situation is personal, Andrew." The teacups were my grandmother's porcelain, delicate cups with hand-painted roses that had survived the Depression, World War II, and 7 decades of family gatherings. I had rescued them from storage when I moved into Spring Gardens, and using them daily had become an act of defiance against the utilitarian mindset that valued things only for their immediate function. Mom. Andrew set down his cup and leaned forward with the earnest expression he had perfected for difficult conversations. We need to talk seriously about your future. This place is nice, but it's expensive. At the rate you're spending money, you'll burn through your savings in a few years. My financial situation is stable. Thank you. Is it? Because from what I can see, you're paying premium prices for services you don't need. Wouldn't it make more sense to move back home where your family can take care of you for free? Free. As if the $800 a month they had been stealing, plus the emotional cost of daily humiliation, amounted to free care. Andrew, I tried living with family. It didn't work. Because we made mistakes, Jessica intervened, her voice adopting the pleading tone she used when reason failed to achieve her goals. But we've learned from those mistakes. We know how to do better now. Do you? Because 5 minutes ago, you were discussing conservatorship proceedings in the parking lot. Oh. The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew's face went pale. Jessica's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of guilt that spread down her neck. You were listening to a private conversation, Jessica said finally, her voice tight with indignation. I was gardening. You were conducting that private conversation in a public parking lot at a volume sufficient to be heard by anyone within 50 feet. Mom, a conservatorship isn't about controlling you, Andrew said carefully. It's about protecting you from people who might take advantage of your trusting nature. People like my son who steals from my bank account? That's not the same, and you know it. Isn't it? You took money without permission, you justified it with expenses I never agreed to pay, and now you're threatening legal action to regain access to my finances. How is that different from the financial abuse you claim you're protecting me from? Andrew stood up abruptly, pacing to my window that looked out onto the garden where I had been peacefully working before their arrival. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, his voice rising. You've become paranoid, suspicious of your own family. These people here are filling your head with ideas about independence and autonomy. But Mom, you're 79 years old. You have Parkinson's. You take 6 different medications. You can't see well enough to drive at night. At some point, reality has to matter more than your feelings. My reality is that I am happier and healthier than I have been since your father died. My feelings matter because they are mine, and for the first time in months, I don't have to apologize for having them. Jessica joined Andrew at the window, and together they looked out at the community that had welcomed me with open arms. Elena, please, be reasonable, Jessica said, her voice adopting the persuasive tone she used with the children when they resisted bedtime. We're not the enemy here. We are your family. We love you. Then prove it. What? Prove that you love me. Not my money, not my utility, not my potential inheritance. Prove that you love me as a person. They looked at each other. Then they looked at me, as if I had asked them to solve advanced calculus. We don't need to prove anything, Andrew said finally. Love isn't something you prove. It's something you feel. Love is something you demonstrate, I corrected, through actions, choices, priorities. And your actions have demonstrated very clearly what your priorities are. I walked to my bedroom and returned with a manila folder I had prepared for exactly this moment. These are copies of my bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, I said, placing the documents on my coffee table. These are photographs of the nursing home brochures I found in your office, with your notations about costs and care levels. These are copies of my will, with your calculations of my estate value. The papers lay between us like evidence in a criminal trial. This is what love looks like to you, I continued. Financial planning around my death, theft disguised as household contributions, and housing arrangements made without my input or consent. Mom, you're taking everything out of context. No, Andrew, I'm finally seeing everything in its proper context. You don't love me. You love what I represent to your financial security. You don't want me in your lives. You want control over my assets until you can transfer them more permanently to yourselves. I opened my front door and held it open. I think it's time for you to leave. Mom, we're not finished talking. Yes, we are. You can have a relationship with me based on mutual respect and genuine affection, or you can continue to plot ways to control my money and my life. But you cannot have both. You're making a mistake, Jessica said as they collected their coats. When you're in a hospital bed with no family around because you've alienated everyone who cares about you, you will regret this stubbornness. And wait, Jessica, I have been in metaphorical hospital beds for months, surrounded by a family who saw my pain as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a comfort to be offered. I will take my chances facing actual illness, surrounded by people who chose to care about me, rather than people who felt obligated to tolerate me. When their car pulled out of the parking lot, I felt something I hadn't expected, a relief so profound it brought me to tears. I had finally stopped trying to earn the love of people who had no intention of giving it. I had finally chosen my own dignity over their approval. For the first time since George died, I felt truly free. That evening, Margarita knocked on my door with a bottle of wine and a conspiratorial grin. "Tough day?" she asked, settling into my armchair as if she belonged there. "Enlightening day," I replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine into my grandmother's crystal goblets. "Those are usually the hardest kind," she said, raising her glass. "Here's to clarity, and to the courage to act on it." "To freedom," I replied, "and to choosing the family that chooses you back." We toasted to that, and to the sunset painting my windows gold, and to the sound of laughter drifting up from the patio where my neighbors, my real family, were enjoying their evening together. I was finally home. 6 months after that final confrontation, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Gone were the sunken cheeks and perpetually tired eyes of someone who had been slowly disappearing into herself. My face had filled out from eating meals I actually enjoyed, rather than picking at leftovers no one else wanted. My hair, which I had started having professionally styled at the beauty salon here in the community, framed my face in soft silver waves that caught the light. Most noticeably, I was smiling. Not the forced, apologetic expression I had worn for months, but a genuine smile that started in my eyes and radiated outward. "Elena, you are positively glowing," Grace said when she arrived for our weekly coffee date. She had become more than the angel who had rescued me from that hospital bed. She had become my dear friend, the sister I never had, but had always wanted. "I feel like I'm glowing," I admitted, pouring coffee into the good china I now used every day. "Yesterday, Harold told me I look 10 years younger than when I first moved in." "Harold has been trying to ask you to the community dance for 3 weeks," Grace laughed. "The poor man turns red as a beet every time you walk into the dining room." I felt the heat rise in my own cheeks. At 79, I was rediscovering the forgotten pleasure of being noticed, appreciated, even flirted with by someone who saw me as a woman instead of a burden. "Don't be ridiculous, we're just friends." Friends who sit together at every meal, work side by side in the garden, and take evening walks that last suspiciously long for people our age, Grace teased. "Elena, honey, when was the last time you let a gentleman court you?" The question caught me off guard. George had been the love of my life, my partner for 53 years, and I had assumed that chapter of my life was over with his death. But Harold's gentle attention, his way of saving the choicest vegetables from the garden for me, his habit of leaving small bouquets of wildflowers by my door, stirred something I thought was buried forever. "I wouldn't know how to be courted anymore," I confessed. "I've been a wife, a mother, a burden. I've forgotten how to just be Elena." "Then it's time to remember." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I bought a new dress. Not a practical, serviceable dress chosen for its durability and ease of washing, but a beautiful royal blue dress with small pearl buttons that made me feel elegant and feminine. The saleswoman at the village boutique was probably younger than Lily, but she treated me with the respect of someone helping another woman prepare for something special. "This color is perfect with your eyes," she said, adjusting the sleeves. "Are you buying for a special occasion?" "I'm buying for me," I replied, and I realized it was the first time in years I had purchased something simply because it made me happy. The community dances were every Friday in the main hall, where they pushed back the tables and Harold played the piano while couples swayed to old-time music. I had gone before, sitting with Margarita and Dorothea, watching the dancers and telling myself I was too old, too rusty, too recently widowed to participate. But that Friday, in my royal blue dress and the pearl earrings George had given me for our 40th anniversary, I walked into that hall ready to dance. Harold's face lit up when he saw me. He was wearing a navy sport coat and tie, his white hair neatly combed, looking distinguished and nervous in equal parts. "Elena," he said, rising from the piano, "you look absolutely radiant." "Thank you, Harold. That's a lovely piece you're playing." "The way you look tonight," he said, his eyes twinkling. It seemed appropriate for the occasion. When the next song began, a slow ballad that transported me back to high school proms and wedding receptions, Harold held out his hand with old-fashioned courtesy. "Would you honor me with this dance?" I placed my hand in his, felt his warm palm against mine, and remembered what it was like to be led across a dance floor by someone who was happy to be there with me. Harold was a graceful dancer, confident without being controlling, attentive without being smothering. As we moved together to the familiar melody, I felt decades of tension leave my shoulders. "I was afraid you might have forgotten how," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "I was afraid I had too," I replied. "But apparently, some things you never really forget." "And like riding a bike," he agreed, "or falling in love." The words hung between us, soft and honest and full of possibility. I looked up into his kind hazel eyes, and I saw something I had almost forgotten existed. The chance for a companionship built on choice, rather than obligation, affection offered freely, rather than extracted through guilt or manipulation. "Harold, I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of conversation." "Then we won't have it tonight," he said simply. "Tonight, we'll just dance." And we did, for song after song, until my feet ached in a pleasant way and my heart felt lighter than it had in years. When the evening ended, Harold walked me to my apartment like a true gentleman, kissed my hand as if we were characters in an old movie, and told me he had had the most wonderful evening he could remember. As I got ready for bed, I saw myself in the mirror again. My hair was slightly mussed from dancing, my cheeks flushed from laughter and gentle exercise, and my eyes were sparkling with something I thought was lost forever: joy. The next morning brought an unexpected visit. I was tending my herb garden in my oldest pair of jeans and a University of Illinois sweatshirt that had been George's when I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Grandma Elena?" I turned to see Ben standing at the garden gate, looking uncertain and older than his 14 years. He had grown several inches since I last saw him, his voice deeper, his face showing the first signs of the man he would one day become. "Ben?" I said, putting down my watering can and walking toward him. "What a wonderful surprise." "Mom doesn't know I'm here," he said quickly. "I took the bus. I told her I was going to soccer practice, but I wanted to see you." My heart squeezed with a mixture of delight and concern. "Is everything okay at home?" He shrugged with the elaborate nonchalance teenagers use to mask deep feelings. "I guess. It's different since you left. Quieter. Mom and Dad argue more, and Lily keeps asking when you're coming back, and they keep saying you're not, and I wanted to see for myself if you were okay." I gestured to the small patio area in front of my apartment. "Would you like to sit down? I could make us some lemonade." "That would be cool." As I made the drinks in my kitchen, I watched Ben through the window, taking in his surroundings with the analytical eye he had inherited from his father. He examined the garden, the other residents visible in the distance, the well-kept buildings and paths. "This place is pretty nice," he said when I returned with the glasses and a plate of cookies. "Not like the nursing homes they show in the movies." "It's not a nursing home," I explained. "It's a community for people who want to maintain their independence while having support when they need it." "Like college for old people?" I laughed at his description. "I suppose that's not a bad comparison. People learn new things here, make new friends, explore interests they never had time for when they were younger." Ben ate 3 cookies while asking surprisingly mature questions about my living situation, my activities, my happiness. His concern seemed genuine, not prompted by adult coaching, and I found myself having the kind of conversation with my grandson I had always hoped we would one day share. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really leave? I mean, I know Mom and Dad say it was because you wanted more independence, but—" He trailed off, struggling with words that were too big for his teenage vocabulary. "But you suspect there was more to it?" He nodded. I considered how much truth to share with a teenager whose world was already complicated by parents who had never learned to separate their needs from others. Ben, sometimes adults make decisions that seem harsh or confusing, but are really acts of self-respect. I left because I realized I was living in a situation where I couldn't be myself, where my needs and feelings didn't matter as much as other people's convenience. So you weren't happy with us? The hurt in his voice broke my heart. This child had been caught in the middle of adult manipulations and betrayals he was too young to understand. Ben, my unhappiness had nothing to do with you or Lily. You are both wonderful children, and I love you more than you can possibly imagine. But love isn't always enough to make a living situation work. Do you think you'll ever come back? I think I will always be your grandmother, no matter where I live, and I think the relationship we build now, as you become a young man, can be whatever we choose to make it. We spent the next hour walking through the community, with Ben meeting Harold, who was impressed by his knowledge of baseball statistics, and Margarita, who immediately enlisted his help with the community newsletter. By the time he had to leave to catch the bus back, Ben seemed more relaxed, more understanding of my decision. "Grandma," he said as we reached the bus stop, "I'm sorry if we made you feel bad when you lived with us. I didn't know." "You didn't make me feel bad, sweetheart. You were just being a kid, which is exactly what you were supposed to be doing." "Can I come see you again? Like regularly?" "I would love that. But Ben, I will not be the secret you keep from your parents. If you want to have a relationship with me, it needs to be honest and out in the open." He considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing important adult decisions. "I'll talk to them," he said finally. "Maybe they'll understand better now that they've seen this place isn't some weird cult or whatever they were worried about." As his bus pulled away, I felt something shift inside my chest. For months, I had grieved the loss of my grandchildren, convinced that choosing my own well-being meant sacrificing my relationship with them. But Ben's visit proved to me that real love, the kind built on genuine affection instead of family obligation, could survive geographical distance and even parental manipulation. That night, I called Lily to tell her about Ben's visit. Her excitement was contagious as she made plans for her own visit the following week, this time with her parents' reluctant knowledge and permission. "Grandma, Ben says you have a boyfriend," she said with the delighted scandal of a 12-year-old who had discovered adult romance. "I have a good friend who happens to be a gentleman," I corrected, though I couldn't keep the smile from my voice. "Ben says he brought you flowers. Harold is very thoughtful. Do you think you'll marry him?" The question caught me completely by surprise. Marriage hadn't even entered my thoughts. I was still adjusting to the idea of companionship, of someone wanting to spend time with me for the simple pleasure of my company. "Lily, honey, I think I'm still learning how to be happy on my own. Romance is wonderful, but it's not something I need to complete me anymore. But do you think you might want it anyway? Not because you need it, but because it would be nice?" Out of the mouths of babes, my 12-year-old granddaughter had just articulated something I hadn't been able to put into words myself. The difference between desperate need and joyful choice. "Yes," I said slowly, "I think I might want it anyway." That night, as I prepared for sleep in my own space, surrounded by my own choices, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I had been a shadow, haunting someone else's home, grateful for scraps of attention, and terrified of being a further burden. Now I was a woman with friends, interests, options, and even the possibility of romance. I was no longer just surviving the death of George, the rejection of Andrew, or the cruelty of Jessica. I was living fully, joyfully, authentically, for the first time in as long as I could remember. As I turned out the lights and settled into my comfortable bed, I could hear Harold playing the piano in the community lounge. The melody of "The Way You Look Tonight" drifted through my window like a lullaby. Tomorrow, I would tend my garden, attend book club, have lunch with Grace, and perhaps, if I felt brave enough, tell Harold I would like to have that conversation about falling in love after all. Tomorrow, I would continue the work of blooming again. A year later, I am sitting in my garden on a crisp autumn morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose that remind me of the watercolor class I started last month. My hands, once shaky with anxiety and Parkinson's, are steady as I hold my coffee cup, the same chipped mug George used to drink from. now a fond reminder of the love that was real instead of a symbol of all I had lost. Harold is beside me in the matching chair he brought over from his apartment when we decided to merge our morning coffee ritual. We don't talk much during these early hours. We have learned that comfortable silence is one of the gifts of deep friendship. He reads his newspaper while I tend to my thoughts, both of us content in the certainty that we are exactly where we choose to be. "A penny for your thoughts," he says, looking up from the sports section with the kind smile that still makes my heart flutter like a schoolgirl's. "I'm thinking about time," I tell him. How much of it I thought I had wasted, and how much I actually had left. Harold folds his newspaper and gives me his full attention. At 82, he has learned that when someone wants to share their thoughts on time, it's worth listening. "When George died, I thought my life was essentially over." I continue, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder we hung together last spring. "I thought I was just marking time until I could join him, existing on the charity of a family who saw me as an obligation instead of a gift. And now? Now I realize that I mistook the end of a chapter for the end of the whole book." And one. Harold reaches over and takes my hand, lacing his fingers through mine in a gesture that has become as natural as breathing. "We are not married. We may never be married. But we have built something precious together. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared interests, and the rare luxury of choosing each other every single day. Your book isn't finished yet," he says. "Heck, you might just be getting to the best part." He's right. This past year has been the most fulfilling of my adult life, not in spite of my age, but because of the wisdom it has brought me. I have learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between family and relatives, between surviving and thriving. Last month, Andrew called. Not Jessica. She hasn't spoken to me since that final confrontation in my apartment. But Andrew, likely prompted by the children's growing relationship with me, reached out with what sounded like genuine concern. "Mom, how are you, really?" he asked, and for the first time in years, his voice carried no hidden motive I could detect. "I'm wonderful, Andrew. Better than I've been in a long time. The kids say you're different. Happier. I am happier. I'm living the life I choose instead of the life others expect me to accept." There was a long pause. "Mom, I want you to know that I've been thinking about how things were between us. I know we made mistakes." "We?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I made mistakes. I let myself think about your finances more than your feelings. I let Jessica convince me that managing your life was the same as caring about you." It wasn't a full apology. Andrew still couldn't quite admit the extent of his betrayal, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever expected to receive. "Andrew, I appreciate that, but I need you to understand something. I don't need you to take care of me anymore. I never did. What I needed was for you to love me without conditions, to value my presence without calculating its cost. Can we? Can we try to rebuild something? Not the old relationship, but something new?" I had considered this question many times over the past year. The answer came easily now. "Yes, but only if you can accept me as I am now, not as the convenient grandmother you want me to be. I will not be moving back into your house. I will not pretend to be helpless so you can feel important. I will not apologize for having a life that doesn't revolve around your needs." "Okay," he said quietly. "I think I can do that. Then we'll see. Relationships are built on actions, not promises." Since then, we have had coffee twice. Awkward conversations where we both have had to learn new ways of relating to each other. Andrew is slowly discovering that I am more interesting as an independent person than I ever was as a dependent mother. I am learning to see him as a flawed human being instead of the perfect son I had created in my imagination. It's progress, however slow. Ben visits every other weekend now, officially this time. He has become my tech consultant, helping me navigate the tablet I bought for taking digital art classes and video calling Grace when she travels to visit her own grandchildren. Lily comes monthly, and we are working on a cookbook together. Her favorite recipes from my collection, updated for modern kitchens and documented so they won't be lost when I'm gone. "Grandma," she said during her last visit, "I want to ask you something, but I don't want to hurt your feelings." "Ask away, sweetheart. I'm tougher than I look." When you lived with us, were you pretending to be happy?" Because I remember you smiled a lot, but now I know what you look like when you're really happy, and it's different." The question was so insightful, so honest, that it took my breath away. Yes, Lily, I was pretending. I thought that if I smiled enough, if I was helpful enough, if I asked for the bare minimum, eventually people would want me around instead of just tolerating me. That's sad. It was. But you know what? Learning to stop pretending was one of the best things I ever did for myself. Now, when I smile, it's because I mean it. She nodded with the wisdom children sometimes possess about emotional truths that adults complicate. "I'm glad you stopped pretending, Grandma. I like the real you better. The real you." At 79, I was finally getting to know her for the first time. Harold and I finish our coffee as the community comes to life around us. Margarita bustles past on her daily newspaper delivery route, stopping to remind us of the movie premiere tonight. Dorothea waves from her balcony, where she is hanging laundry in deliberate defiance of the community rule about clotheslines, her small act of rebellion that everyone pretends not to notice. The Johnsons from Building C head out for their morning walk, still holding hands after 62 years of marriage. This is my world now. Not perfect, not glamorous, but genuine. A place where I am valued for who I am instead of what I can provide. Where my age is considered an accumulation of experience rather than an expiration date approaching too quickly. "Elena," Harold says, as we gather our coffee cups and prepare to start the day, "do you ever regret leaving your family?" I consider the question seriously. A year ago, the answer would have been immediate and full of guilt. Now, I understand that leaving my family's house was not the same as leaving my family. I regret that it took me so long to value myself enough to demand better treatment. I regret that I taught people to see me as disposable by acting as if I were. But leaving? Leaving was the first honest thing I had done in years. Any advice for people who might be in similar situations? The question surprises me. Harold knows my story, but he has never asked me to distill it into lessons before. Stop waiting for permission to live your lives, I say without hesitation. Stop believing your worth is dependent on other people's approval. Stop accepting scraps of affection from people who should be offering you full-course meals of love and respect. That's harder than it sounds when you're alone and afraid. Everything worth doing is harder than it sounds. But you know what's even harder? Spending the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you had been brave enough to bet on yourself. Harold smiles and kisses my cheek with the tender affection of someone who has learned that love doesn't diminish with age. It just becomes more precious, because we understand how rare it island. As I get ready for my day watercolor class at 10, lunch with Grace at noon, book club at 3, dinner with Harold at 6, I marvel at how full my calendar has become. Not with obligations I dread, but with activities I chose because they bring me joy. Tonight, Harold and I will attend the monthly community dance. I bought another new dress last week, a deep emerald green that brings out my eyes and makes me feel beautiful in a way I thought was lost forever. We will dance to the music of our youth, surrounded by friends who celebrate our happiness instead of resenting it. Tomorrow, I will meet with a lawyer to update my will. Not because Andrew and Jessica have pressured me, but because I want to ensure my money goes to places and people who will use it to spread kindness instead of enabling selfishness. Grace will receive a substantial gift. Spring Gardens will get a donation to its scholarship fund that helps low-income individuals afford community living. The children will receive modest amounts when they turn 30, old enough to appreciate rather than simply expect inheritance. The rest will go to organizations that support seniors in transition, people like the me of a year ago who need help remembering their own worth. Tonight, as I stand in front of my mirror getting ready for the dance, I see a woman I recognize and admire. Silver hair, elegantly styled. Skin that shows every year I've lived, but glows with health and contentment. Eyes that sparkle with anticipation for whatever comes next. I am 79 years old. I am strong, independent, loved by choice instead of obligation, and happier than I have been since I was a young woman discovering the world for the first time. I am not waiting to die. I am learning how to live. And if there is anyone out there, anyone listening to my story who feels invisible, unwanted, taken for granted, I want you to know this. It is never too late to write a new chapter. It is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to discover that the life you are settling for is not the life you have to keep. You are worth more than the scraps of attention people throw you. You deserve more than to be tolerated by people who claim to love you. The question is, do you believe it enough to do something about it? Because if you do, if you are ready to stop accepting less than you deserve, then maybe, just maybe, your best chapter is still waiting to be written. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or do you know someone who has experienced this kind of treatment? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so we can share this message with someone else who needs to hear it.